Welcome to Simply by Deal HQ. On this podcast, we engage thought leaders on topical issues around law and business in the most simplistic manner.
Hello everyone, welcome to season 3, episode 3 of Simply by Deal HQ. Today we're diving into the productive use of energy and unpacking where the real business case for mini-grids across Africa truly lies. According to Ban Ki-moon, former UN Secretary General, energy is the golden thread that connects economic growth, increased social equity, and an environment that allows the world to thrive. According to the World Bank also, Nigeria faces the world's largest electricity access deficit, with 43% of its population, approximately 85 million people, without access to grid electricity. Among the poorest 40% of Nigerians, only 31% have grid access, highlighting significant inequalities across socio-economic groups, regions, and rural urban communities. Even for those connected to the grid, unreliable supply and frequent outages remain a daily challenge, severely affecting livelihoods and economic productivity. From an industry and sector perspective, this unreliable energy landscape continues to constrain business growth, increase production costs, and limit opportunities for expansion. This is why the concept of productive use of energy, PUE, becomes essential. PUE addresses the power gap not merely by providing electricity, but by ensuring energy access is a nest to drive income-generating activities, industrial operations, agricultural processing, and small business development. By enabling enterprises to use reliable energy for productive economic purposes, PUE serves as a strategic solution to transform energy access into economic empowerment, stimulate industrial growth, create jobs, and unlock sustainable development across Nigeria. While Nigeria has made significant strides in rural electrification, access alone isn't enough to move the needle on economic development. Real transformation only happens when energy powers a milling machine, a cold room, or a manufacturing unit. At the end of the day, electricity that doesn't drive productivity is a cost. Electricity that does is an investment. Today, we are joined by our esteemed guest, Mr. Lamide Niyi-Afuye, to explore key issues shaping the productive use of energy ecosystem in Nigeria. We will be discussing how agro-processing, cold storage, and local industry are reshaping the investment thesis for developers and what the real-world transaction structures driving that growth actually looks like on the ground. Lamide currently serves as the CEO of Africa Minigrid Developers Association. His professional journey is deeply rooted in developing and promoting Pan-African efforts to expand access to clean, reliable energy for over 600 million underserved people. With a strong foundation in law from the University of Birmingham and a career spanning roles in regulatory policy, capital markets, and energy solutions, Lamide has consistently demonstrated expertise in driving strategic initiatives and fostering stakeholder collaboration. Beyond his executive responsibilities, he is deeply engaged in policy development and industry advocacy, serving on committees with organizations such as the Africa Securities Exchange Association, the Nigerian Bar Association, and the Securities and Exchange Commission's Capital Market Committee. He is passionate about building regulatory innovation and mentoring emerging professionals in the sector. It is therefore a great honor to have him join our podcast, share insights from the perspective of a savvy and consummate stakeholder and participants in the ecosystem. Thank you so much, Lamide, for agreeing to join us today.
Thank you very much, Amabola. It's a pleasure.
Now that our introductions are done, permit me to jump right to my first question. Mini-grids were once viewed primarily as a tool for social inclusion, getting lights into homes. But today, the industry is pivoting toward an almost industrial mindset. If we strip away the technicalities, how do you define the productive use of energy for a local entrepreneur More importantly, why has PE shifted from being a nice-to-have social goal to the literal survival mechanism for a mini-grid's balance sheet?
So thank you very much, Omobola. I believe, I think this podcast and the topic is very, very timely. What I always say when I discuss the mini-grid business and where we are as an industry collectively from the African is that we are in innovate or die season. So for those of us who do not innovate and think outside the box and adapt our business models to what is sustainable, essentially, we will not survive. In the simplest form, productive use of energy means using electricity to create value, whether it's for households, for communities, for industries and local economies. As you rightly said, mini grids in the early stages were prioritized around household connections and which I guess was our view of what social inclusion meant. But what somebody once told me, one of our members told me was, if you only prioritize the household connection, it's almost like shining a light on the poverty of people. But what we've seen is that what has become necessary is that beyond just the connection of the home, how do we ensure there's productive use of that energy? How do we ensure that the power that is being created is creating value? As industries are growing and as this industry is growing and evolving, it's coming clear that for not just for the mini-grid business to thrive, but for these communities themselves to use this electricity productively, that PUE and what I consider big industrial demand and consumption is absolutely important to ensure from the perspective of the mini grid developer that there's long-term strong revenue assurance, and which leads the companies to a pathway to profitability and sustainability. And on the side of true social impact, you're creating local economies by powering productivity. You're ensuring that people can mill, can manufacture, can preserve, can trade, and can earn. So the real shift is absolutely important to ensure that productive use is not a nice to have, but is an engine for rural economic industrialization. I'll stop there, and I hope that we can dive deeper in future.
Thank you for emphasizing that the real shift is absolutely moving from it just being to power homes, but as an engine for rural economic industrialization, which is now going to take me to my second question about steps that Nigeria has taken. So Nigeria's mini-grid regulatory landscape has evolved rapidly and with notable intent. In December 2025, NERC introduced the guidelines on the commercial framework for interconnected mini-grids, bringing a two-part pricing structure aimed at resolving long-standing commercial tensions between developers and distribution companies. This was followed in April 2026 by the Minigrid Regulations 2026, which streamlined the licensing regime, clarified capacity thresholds for isolated and interconnected systems, and introduced a 30 business day permit timeline. Taken together, these reforms have been broadly welcomed by the industry as providing much needed clarity and predictability. So Lamide, from your own perspective, what do these changes materially unlock for developers and investors, particularly in terms of bankability and scale? How do they reshape the economics of productive use beyond basic energy access, which you had also alluded to in answering the first question? And importantly, where do the limits of regulation become apparent? What structural or market barriers remain that even well-crafted rules cannot resolve on their own?
So thank you very much, Omobola. I would say it's a great delight from a personal perspective to see the evolution of Nigeria's electricity industry. And more selfishly as a Nigerian, it's great to see Nigeria taking a strong leadership role in the DRE, in the promotion of distributed renewable energy, DRE, which includes infrastructure like Minigrid. With the new regulations that were put forward by the Nigeria Electricity Regulatory Commission, particularly increasing the threshold of isolated mini grids from 1 megawatt to 5 megawatts, and increasing the threshold for interconnected mini grids to up to 10 megawatts. Nigeria is basically showing that DRE is here to stay. I remember my time when I was working with a company called Mainstream, and we acquired 60% shares in in a distribution company called Yola Disco. I remember, before even knowing what mini grids were, saying that the best way to run this disco is if we decentralize the infrastructure and make it more easy to manage, because we're talking about a very vast area. So what NERC has done, if you allow me to say, is extremely revolutionary. We're beginning to see traditional utilities working hand in hand with DRE utilities, and Nigeria is now setting a clearer framework for that interaction by clarifying commercial relationships between developers and discos. It gives more predictability around the tariffs, the permit structure, capacity thresholds, timelines, and developers are thinking less in terms of isolated projects and more in terms of scalable portfolios. For me, that matters. And if you look at the way investors think and what is investable and what they classify as bankability, for me, that solves the bankability question from day zero, because those risks that would typically be priced into the investment have been addressed. One, because you're talking now at scale from day zero. You're talking now of more peri-urban electrification, less isolated. Not saying that isolated mini grids are not working, but if you see developers now who can have a strong portfolio of interconnected and isolated mini grids, then they can. It's a lot easier to answer the bankability question. So the natural evolution of these sites, you can see more in peri-urban areas, for example. You can see more economic activity. You can answer the PUE question a lot easier. If you take a place, for example, like Mararaba or Gwagwalada in the Abuja network, that might fall under what we call the band D categorization, where maybe they're guaranteed up to 8 hours of power, but with demand for probably band B type of reliability, where you're looking at between 16 to 20 hours of power, if you like. If interconnected mini grids can provide that additional for example, additional hours of reliable power, more people will be working for longer periods, businesses can operate, goods can be stored, local economies can begin to grow. That is where this is productive use in practice, beyond the terminology. It's not just about access to electricity, it's about what that people can do with that electricity. Now, from a limitation standpoint, regulation and I guess the reforms have some limitations, and I'll explain. I used the example of a site of one of our members, Ashipa Electric. I went to in the Gwagwalada region, Kaida Soho. Now, I met this lady who runs a shop that sells provisions, fish, basically is the local supermarket in that area. And she said, prior to the mini grid coming, she would have to go into the town, the Gwagwalada town, to get ice so that she can store her things. But the road networks were so bad that she basically potentially would risk her life when in the rainy season. I was witness to that because on our way there, our car got stuck, and this was rainy season. And so the road networks were pretty poor. I also met a miller who had a similar story. He says, the mini grid allows him to mill more productively and sell to not just the community where his factory is, but he could sell to neighboring communities. But during the rainy season, for example, there's flooding, so he can't sell it hampers his ability to sell to the neighboring communities. So what am I saying here? Something as little, the regulation has triggered the infrastructure and has created that productivity. But allied infrastructure, like as simple as roads, can affect that product. So the reforms should not sit in isolation. We should think about it from a global economic development standpoint. And what are the allied infrastructure that can support that productivity and let it, scale these industries beyond just these isolated projects. So whilst regulation is important, let's think of it holistically from a global perspective. Then maybe one last thing I say is the potential limitation. One thing that I say that Nigeria never, or even Africa never suffers from beautifully written rules. I'm speaking to lawyers like yourselves who probably support those. But a challenge that we tend to face sometimes is implementation. So I would always say that, ensuring that there's clarity in the rules is not enough, or that the rules exist, but implementation to the letter and being pragmatic to ensure that regulation does not become too rigid or stifle business. It's enabling business.
Thank you for that. Now that you brought in the Africa perspective, I was going to ask you that later, but I'll just then tie it in, and so we can more or less do like a comparison with other African countries concerning. So let me just ask that the mini-grid sector across the African continent presents a paradox that is difficult to ignore. Regulatory frameworks differ sharply from one market to the next, and each reflect distinct political economies and financing realities. Yet the developers operating across these markets, the institutional capital targeting them, and the productive use barriers they face are frequently the same. AMDA itself exists precisely because the continental dimension of this sector requires a continental voice. So as the CEO of AMDA, what does genuine regulatory and market harmonization across African mini-grid markets practically require? And where has the continent made the most meaningful progress and fallen short in building the Pan-African institutional infrastructure needed to turn dispersed national markets into a coherent, investable asset class?
Thank you so much, Omobola, for that question. So as you rightly noted, AMDA is a Pan-African organization, and we seek to ensure there's some level of standardization and harmonization of practices, and maybe that there's some knowledge sharing and knowledge exchange between the various policymakers, regulators, and as best as possible, the stakeholders. So if you look at our programmatic work, we have a CEO roundtable platform where multiple developers can be sharing knowledge about what is happening in their different markets. We also within our membership have international mini-grid companies who operate in different countries, and they're able to take learnings from each market and use that for their engagements. But I would add that genuine harmonization does not necessarily mean you're copy and pasting policy or copy and pasting the regulation verbatim or like for like. You need to understand the local nuances, the priorities of the governments. So I always say electricity and its sector is highly political because it's something that affects the day-to-day human being. It's something that affects everybody. It's not an exclusive reserve of any person. But really and truly, harmonization for me means that developers, investors, and governments can move across markets and still find the basic building blocks, fundamental building blocks. So clear permitting, predictable tariffs, technical standards are quite similar, comparable market data. And that takes, if you like, in our own capacity, to the extent of our influence, we also from time to time publish standards. So if you go on our website, you see that, for example, we published a mapping report of the health and safety practices in Africa. We've also done some reports in specific countries, Zambia, Kenya, and Nigeria. So from time to time, we're doing our own parts. I would say also in general, Africa has made some progress through initiatives like the Mission 300 initiative, where it's kind of brought together all the various stakeholders into one place to agree on the path forward. The governments themselves have at least 30 countries, the last time I checked, have published their national energy compacts, which are strong statements of intent to reform their markets and position it position it for universal electrification as best as possible. We have organizations like the African Forum for Utility Regulators, AFO, that has published a benchmark, or if you like, a standard template for developing mini-grid regulation, a standard template for determining mini-grid tariffs. And we're seeing countries across the continent adopt those tools. We're seeing we're encouraged by the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and the Africa Single Electricity Market, which I think we could still do more with. But with all of these put together, are strong signs of intent of harmonization of the markets in Africa. I would say that execution to some extent at varying levels still lags, especially as we're seeing fragmented data. But we on our part are trying to harmonize this data and determine what the key performance indicators are. So if you look at our benchmarking Africa's mini-grid reports, it's a strong reference point for data and information and insights and market intelligence on the mini-grid sector. If you ask me, one ask that I would need, if I'm being selfish, is that if we really want to embrace some sort of harmonization, I think we could do more with grandfathering approvals and not having, for example, I see no reason today why a mini-grid company in Nigeria has to almost get a license every time that they're going to another site. What I would encourage the government to do is to see if they can strong, reliable demand data. And that's why I spoke to you about about where the geospatial technologies can support in consolidation with the governments. For example, I know that if you go to the Nigeria Communications Commission, they can tell you where the current telco towers and the prospective telco towers will be built. So if everybody's if we can get access to these data sets that can tell you where demand is from day zero, then we probably were able to do the aggregation better. From a legal perspective, standardization of contract. From the procurement perspective, pooled procurement of equipment by multiple players, local maintenance partners, risk-sharing tools to make lenders more comfortable. I would say, maybe I would close by saying the DFIs have a role to play, and bridging commercial capital with the realities of emerging markets. But delivery has to be organized around with the ensuring that developers are carried along, because ultimately, who's going to implement all these projects? It is the developer. So I'll stop there and back to you, Nobola. Thank you.
All right, so you've said it's all collective effort, so it's not going to be one single stakeholder, because each stakeholder has got different roles to play, and so everybody has to get on board. So I'm still going to stay on the issue of financing, and my question here too is, blended finance has long been positioned as the bridge between commercial capital and the realities of mini-grid markets in Africa. The toolkit is well established. Concessional capital absorbing first loss guarantees de-risking senior trenches, results-based financing, incentivizing performance, and technical assistance supporting pipeline development. And yet, despite this architecture, the productive use financing gap remains vast, with estimates reaching $86 billion annually across Sub-Saharan Africa through 2030. So where is the disconnect? What role can blended finance realistically play in accelerating productive use at scale? And what would a fit-for-purpose financing instrument look like, particularly in terms of currency, tenor, collateral, and risk allocation to truly meet the needs of rural entrepreneurs rather than simply reflect investor constraints?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mobola. So as I said previously, when we speak about productive use at AMDA, we have 2 points. We have the one where you talk about larger anchor businesses, so a factory, a big commercial farm, telco tower, that can help scale operations or at least guarantee revenue assurance. And on the other hand, you have equipment level productive use, so grinding mill, cold room, welding machine, things like that help local small businesses to run. At the large anchor business, from the large anchor business perspective, the financial disconnect or gap may not exist. What might be required might be incentivizing through some of these RPFs, which I mentioned, ensuring that maybe you can support with front loading the capital for the capex. But these anchor businesses will typically be structured under long-term PPAs or utility service contracts. So the financing gap may not exist as much as the equipment level productive use, where we're talking about smaller entrepreneurs here and there. And I would say we're starting to see innovative financing models, where you see appliance credits, as you rightly said. There's a pay-go equipment financing, micro-lending structures designed around usage. And what I would say is a fit-for-purpose instrument that would be needed, maybe a combination of local currency debt, some long-term credit, patient capital, and some guarantees. So entrepreneurs that are carrying maybe foreign exchange risks can be hedged in some way and protected. What I would say honestly though is in like an area where the sector, AMDA included, needs stronger evidence base to be able to advocate strongly for it. So it's going back to the point about aggregating demand and knowing where each productive use segment is important. I know that there are institutions like CLASP that are taking the lead in this front, but we need more data, we need more information to be able to fully determine, to make a strong case for the investment opportunity there. As going back to the point I made, we have people doing a lot of very small good things. We probably need data to know where the big investment opportunity is, so that we can go to the investors and say, this is what the size of the opportunity is, and this is the types of solutions that fit these types of demand.
You've spoken extensively about barriers in the course of your responses so far, but I'm going to get us to go deeper now. So, the barriers to productive use of energy have been documented extensively. They appear in World Bank reports, in RMI studies, in ESMA publications, and in the lived experience of every developer who has commissioned a mini-grid and waited for demand to grow. Awareness, affordability, equipment access, financing constraints, skills gap, and limited market linkages are all part of the picture. But here is what makes this more than an academic exercise. These barriers have been known for years and they persist. What are the most deeply entrenched barriers preventing communities from using electricity for income generating activities? And why have they proven so difficult to remove despite years of institutional attention and significant capital development?
So there's a known stat. I don't know if I need to quote the source here, but that 8 out of 10 businesses fail. So that does not exclude local businesses. That's not the exclusive reserve of any strata of society. So what I'm trying to say is that whether by virtue of macroeconomic environment or otherwise, these are just natural facts of life. So electricity alone can unlock productivity, but it does not guarantee the commercial viability of any business, or it can support it, it can catalyze it, but it's not a guarantee that it will succeed. So there are a lot of factors that impact the ability of businesses and to take advantage of the electricity that may be made available to them. So businesses are still running within the context of the wider macros. So high borrowing cost, for example, is a big factor. Currency volatility, inflation, collateral requirements, equipment costs, procurement gaps, customs. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but those are factors that impact business, and that is not removed from any strata of society, whether we're talking about rural, peri-urban, or urban areas. So I think that this is where DFIs and governments have a role to play, ensuring that there's enough incentives to catalyze or subsidize the emergence of these businesses, that there's enough risk mitigation built into markets to ensure that the local businesses, agri processing can be scaled up, things like that. So productive use will scale when some of these programs are that are that focus holistically on the economy can help stimulate the local economy and maybe mitigate it from any macroeconomic shocks that may arise. So electricity, which is becoming increasingly available, whether it's through DRE or even the national utility and national grids, is being available. But the next task is to make sure that the economy actually works. We don't take it in isolation. Electricity could be a catalytic, but it's not the holy grail.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you for that. So the economy should actually work looking at it. So all of it's not in isolation. So it's all embedded in when an economy is working, and productive use can be a catalyst to help with that development. Fantastic. So this is going to take me now to my final question for you today, and that is the gap between where the sector is today and where it needs to be by 2030 is not one of technology or awareness. The solutions are known, which you emphasized today. The evidence is established and policy frameworks are increasingly in place. The real constraint is with execution, building the institutional, financial, and operational systems required to deliver at the speed and scale demanded by over 600 million people without reliable electricity. So the question is, what are the critical shifts across institutions, market structures, and delivery models that must happen between now and 2030 to transition the mini-grid sector from a grant-dependent, pilot-driven space into a commercially viable, scalable asset class capable of meeting Africa's energy access challenge?
Thank you very much, Mola. I would say that we at AMDA, we've taken steps with support from our members. I believe about 27 mini-grid companies endorsed this position paper that we put out early in the year, called 17 Actions for Ensuring Mini-Grids Catalyze Electrification in Sub-Saharan Africa. It's available on our website, but I would encourage you, as part of the comms for this podcast, to share with your audience. And from where we stand, the shift to 2030 is fundamentally about execution. Our sector needs large-scale corporate equity and local currency debts and innovative financing solutions. Goes without saying, we have within our markets, we've said up to $46 billion is required for mini grids play its own role. Under the Mission 300 initiative, for example, we are positioned to deliver at least 116 million of the 300 million people sought to be connected. And for us to achieve that, we're looking at a range of $28 to $46 billion. So that is the kind of capital that needs to be mobilized. We need more standardized industry frameworks, modular project design. We need more stable regulation. We have the templates, so we'd encourage governments to come to us or we can introduce them to the Africa Forum for Utility Regulators, who will take them through how to adopt or adapt the regulations to suit their local circumstances. We also require stronger integration with adjacent sectors. I said you can't take electricity as a silo. We have to work with the agriculture sector, the huge demand, the huge industries that will be consuming power, agriculture sector, the telecoms sector, productive demand that can strengthen the economics of mini-grids to play its catalytic role. So I would say we need institutions, financiers, developers to align quickly enough to move mini-grids from pilots, which we have seen already, to real commercially viable, scalable asset classes. Now, if I may put it in a shameless plug, AMDA in itself, in our capacity as the voice for the DRE and mini-grid sector, we're playing our role through our convening platform. We provide support to mini-grid developers through our access to capital work, where from the market entry point to knowledge sharing, we have finance series, to the connecting them to the investment through our AMDA Capital Connect platform, to also supporting them in the fundraising journey by placing strong, credible chief financial officers, CFOs within their companies, embedding them under our CFO placement program, supported by CAMCO, and really looking at it from end to end. So we also have a professional services hub where we get bespoke rates on legal, financial services and to these companies. To name a few, we work closely with the World Bank ESMA, with the Africa Development Bank, CEFA, Africa Minigrid Acceleration Program team. We work closely with CAMCO. We work closely with Good Energies Foundation, CLASP, the UK government through the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, the Swedish International Development Agency, to name a few of our partners. So we invite you to reach out to us and work with us as we aim to achieve global universal electrification at the scale required sustainably. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for that, Lamide. I think we should all, of course, acknowledge the work that AMDA is already doing in this space, like you've emphasized, and I believe that stakeholders or partners who are interested in getting into the space should, it would be a good start for them to come to your association, that's AMDA, to be able to work or collaborate in terms of driving the productive use energy space. So Lamide, thank you very much for today's for joining us today. You really have one key thing you really emphasized today is the execution. It's not like we do not lack policies or reforms or what to do, but execution is very key. And you've also emphasized the capital required to move from now to 2030, looking at around 28 to 46 billion USD, and of course, standardizing industry frameworks, stronger integration, among others, that to take us from the pilot phase where we are to real commercially available, scalable asset class. So that's going to be all for today. Thank you, Lamide, for making out time of your busy schedule to discuss with us today. We are glad to receive from your wealth of knowledge on today's matter of discussion. We would also like to say a very big thank you to our listeners. As always, the conversation continues on our social media handles. Do remember to send us your comments and thoughts on today's episode. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. This podcast is brought to you by Deal HQ Partners. To find out more about our services, visit www.dealhqpartners.com. See you on the next episode.